Across the world, protesters have taken to the streets after the killing of George Floyd at the hands of 4 police officers in Minneapolis. They're not only calling for justice, but for the reform of the American police system altogether.
He can't breathe! He can't breathe!
Most of the protests have been peaceful.
Move that away! Move that!
But others have led to violent clashes and even more police brutality.
We are seeing a level of intensity and fever across the country that is signaling to elected leaders that something needs to be done differently.
In Philadelphia, police officers in riot gear pepper-sprayed protesters who appeared trapped between a freeway and a fence.
There's nowhere for them to get out, and they're making
But just across the Delaware River in Camden, New Jersey, a very different scene.
Police officers in Camden, New Jersey are being praised tonight for joining the protesters there this weekend.
This was not a happy accident, and it did not happen overnight.
The reason why Camden's not boiling over isn't because we went out and marched with them on one day. It's because we've been with them every day for the last 7 years.
Building goodwill and trust is something that takes a long time. And so when a moment comes like this, the police chief has the credibility to walk with demonstrators.
So how did Camden get to this point? And is its reputation as a shining example of police reform truly deserved? Camden, New Jersey hasn't always been a bastion of police reform. Just under a decade ago, the majority Black and Hispanic city was one of the poorest in America, and it still is today.
The biggest challenge that residents face is the impact that being an impoverished city brings. Just the daily struggle of making enough money to pay bills. And then on top of that, violence is part of the experience of living in Camden. I lost 2 people back to back of a murder. I was shot myself in 2006 as an innocent bystander. Any single person you talk to in the city knows someone who's either been shot or murdered.
Last summer we had 3 people shot 2 blocks that way. We had a person shot 1 block that way. Just last week, at this time of the day, we had a person shot right in front of the store.
There was a moral imperative to do something different. You know, to be quite frank with you, the organization was one that any community member on the street would probably describe as apathetic, lethargic, and corrupt.
Before the reforms, Camden agreed to pay $3.5 million in damages to 88 people whose convictions were overturned because of rampant corruption within the police department. Typical of communities of color nationwide, excessive force was high and trust of law enforcement was low. So in 2013, after spikes in murder year after year, the city police department was dissolved entirely and placed under control of the county.
We've created a countywide force that is putting more police officers on the streets of Camden and putting more resources at their disposal.
The governing bodies of the city, the county, and the state of New Jersey all fell in a line with the idea that something radical had to happen. Something different was the mandate.
That mandate was a complete overhaul, fundamentally changing how the department was run. All of the officers were fired and then most rehired after taking a pay cut. In just under 2 years, the number of officers nearly doubled from 250 to 400, and in 2019, it implemented one of the strongest use of force policies in the country.
Much of traditional police training over the years was you exert command and control, you do so swiftly and forcefully, and that will resolve situations quickly and more safely. But yet the evidence never really bared out on that. And what we've learned over time is that if you apply certain strategies and tactics,
Drop the knife!
you can have a safer resolution of these traditional violent events that have better ending results for the subject that you're dealing with and the officer as well.
One of the changes that we advocate for here at the Policing Project is to encourage departments to give their officers more guidance, require de-escalation, ban chokeholds and strangleholds, make sure that deadly force is only used as a last resort.
It's driving home the belief that just because we can use force does not mean we should use force. And here are a menu of options that you can employ. And this is what we did in Camden. You're actually required to run through that menu before you do use force.
That change did not come easily. Even with bipartisan support from the governing board of the city, county, and state in New Jersey, police viewed it as union busting.
When I first started as a police chief, I had a labor organization that would probably be more categorized as defense attorneys for cops. They fought me on every single issue. You know, if I said the sky was blue, they would say it was black. Anything that was trying to be done in a progressive manner, they exhausted a significant amount of resources to maintain the status quo.
Demolishing one department and switching to a new was an extreme reaction to an extreme problem. Good officers lost their jobs, lost their income because of the sloppy way the transition happened. Now, it was sloppy, but it was also unprecedented. Nothing like that had ever happened in the United States, let alone New Jersey. And that may be the grand sacrifice that's made when you're trying to eliminate a department that has many issues.
By the police department's account, since 2012, reports of excessive force complaints have dropped by 95%, and homicides, which reached 67 in 2012, have dropped almost every year since.
Used to be, you call them today and they come tomorrow.
And now?
And now, 20 minutes, give them 20 minutes.
Today, the department is much better. The officers have a faster response time. They have body cameras. You could see the impact of the training they had on both de-escalation and implicit bias.
We essentially were able to drop murders by more than 70% and cut violent crime in half by empowering the people of the community and giving them the ability to reclaim their neighborhoods rather than us just militarizing city streets and further polarizing and re-victimizing many people within the community.
When you match courage with compassion, with care and understanding of the community, like we've seen here in Camden, some really outstanding things can begin to happen.
I think Camden is doing a great job, but the only people who could really tell you that are the residents of Camden. And I think if they are walking with the chief and they feel like they're being heard, then we know it's working.
However, for residents and activists in Camden, some question how much real progress has been made, especially since Scott Thompson's retirement in 2019.
George Floyd! George Floyd! George Floyd! No justice, no peace! No justice, no peace!
The reason why we are organizing today is to show that Camden has been praised as the model for police reform across the country. And today we want to make sure that everyone knows that Camden's not the symbol that should be spread across the country for law enforcement. It stands for over-policing. It stands for a police force that doesn't represent the city that it serves.
Our police force shouldn't look like Morristown, or Seaside Heights, or Ocean City. Our police force should look like Camden, right?
I'm not here to say how terrible the police are doing. We're saying that if President Obama comes here in 2015 and tells you you're the symbol of police reform across the country, then let's hold you to a higher standard. It's not here just for symbolism. We want to see those real change, because the Camden residents know the real story behind the Camden Police Department.
Despite Camden having one of the strictest use of force policies in the country, there have still been 3,183 examples of force used by officers from 2012 to 2016. A statement from the Camden Police Department says, quote, "Every use of force incident is reviewed through body-worn camera footage, and if something was done incorrectly, the officer is sent to remedial training." In addition, there have been multiple reports of officers exerting unnecessary force, including a man being punched by an officer multiple times in the face during an arrest. That officer was fired the next day.
Within 24 hours, our entire senior command staff was ordered to go into roll calls, play that video, and challenge the room full of officers. Does anyone here support or think what they're seeing here is lawful or consistent with our policies? And that if you were to engage in this type of behavior, you're an outlier and you don't have our support, and we don't view you as one of us.
So while there was swift action brought against the offending officers caught on tape, critics say there are many officers who have used force and not been held accountable. The people who police the police in America are the police, with internal investigations conducted by other officers. In addition, Camden does not have a civilian review board where citizens investigate complaints by the public concerning misconduct by police officers, and there are calls that it needs one.
The number one thing that needs to change is for policing and police policymaking to become more democratic. I think that the communities that bear the brunt of policing need to have a bigger voice in what that actually looks like.
So when it comes to the democratization of the police, it also extends to the democratization of police responsibility. When Scott Thompson was the chief of the Camden Police, he said one line over and over again.
Nothing stops a bullet like a job.
Which is a job that isn't controlled by the police.
Even with the training and body cams and all those good things that our department now has are not enough to really do what should be our ultimate goal, which is to make sure that families are able to make enough money to pay their bills, to support their children, send them to good quality schools.
When Chief Thompson says that nothing stops a bullet like a job, I don't think that he thinks it's the police's job to make sure everyone's employed. I think he thinks it's government's job to think holistically about the problem. So if you could tell any major police department that we're actually going to invest in social services so that homelessness and opioid addiction are taken off your plate and put onto someone else's, maybe they'd be willing to shift funding a little bit.
Ultimately, Camden's story is about changing the rules of engagement for police officers, and the numbers suggest those changes have made policing here more humane and effective than 7 years ago. But those reforms are just the beginning of what community organizers say is needed.
This is a start of something new. This is a start of a movement in Camden to hold the police force accountable, to hold community leaders accountable for the change that the people of Camden really want. Police around America needs to be well versed in the history of social injustice around the country. They need to be aware of their internal biases. And until that happens, I don't see the police around the nation making a true change.